Picture this. You're driving through Central Florida. You've just passed your 14th outlet mall, your 8th billboard for a theme park, your 3rd gas station selling gator jerky next to a wall of foam pool noodles. You're in the gravitational pull of the mouse. Everything is fluorescent and laminated and smells faintly of sunscreen and funnel cake. And then you exit. You duck off the interstate and onto a 2-lane road, and the world changes. Spanish, check. Spanish moss hangs from the live oak trees, like the land itself is wearing a shawl. The light goes amber. The billboards disappear. The air gets heavier. And then you see it. A hand-painted wooden sign. And on that sign, 4 words that will rearrange something in the back of your brain. Certified medium on duty. Welcome to Cassadaga, Florida, the only zip code in America where the whole town is the haunted house. Now, before you form an opinion, and I can hear you forming one already, let me tell you something important. This place is not what you think it is. You're thinking crystal balls. You're thinking velvet curtains and a woman with too many rings asking if you've recently lost someone. You're thinking tourist trap with a supernatural paint job. I understand. That's a reasonable assumption. It's Florida, after all. A state that has never met a roadside attraction it didn't want to give a parking lot to. But Cassadaga is something different. Cassadaga is the real thing. Whatever the real thing is, and that's a question we are absolutely going to sit with today. This place has been it for over 130 years. We're talking about the oldest, continuously active spiritualist community in the southeastern United States. A 57-acre stretch of Victorian cottages, shaded lanes, and quiet parks, listed on the National Register of Historical Places. A federal tax-exempt church, a community with a code of ethics, a board of trustees, a library, a healing center, and a bookstore. It looks, from the outside, like a very peaceful summer camp. One that happens to have a certified medium the way your dentist's office has a certified hygienist. The town t-shirts say it best, where Mayberry meets the Twilight Zone, and they are not wrong. Now, every town has a founding story. Most of them involve a land grant, a river, and someone named Ezekiel. Cassadaga's involves a ghost. The year's 1868. A 12-year-old boy in Minnesota is being baptized. Moved into a hole cut in frozen lake ice because apparently Minnesota felt that nearly freezing to death was an appropriate welcome to Christianity. The boy comes up spluttering, and according to the story, immediately starts receiving messages from the other side. His name is George Colby. His Baptist parents are not thrilled. George leaves home early. He begins traveling the eastern seashore, the Midwest, making a name for himself as a trance medium, giving readings, conducting séances, developing what people are calling an unusual gift. He becomes known in certain circles as the Seer of Spiritualism, which is the kind of title that either opens doors or gets them slammed into your face, depending on the door. By 1875, George has tuberculosis. His vocal cords are damaged. The man who makes his living speaking for the dead is running out of a voice. And then, in a séance in Iowa, of all places, one of his spirit guides appears, a Native American spirit named Seneca. And Seneca has instructions. Go south, Seneca says. Find the pine-covered hills above the silvery lakes. There you will be healed, and there you will build a community. Now, you might hear that and think, a sick man with tuberculosis heading south for warmer weather is not a supernatural event. That's called a doctor's recommendation. And you would not be entirely wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. George Colby boards a train to Jacksonville. He takes a steamboat up the St. Johns River. He gets in a mule-drawn wagon and follows a rutted path eastward through scrub and sandpine and Florida wilderness that at the time had not been offered a timeshare. And when the wagon crests a small hill, he finds exactly what Seneca described: pine-covered hills overlooking several lakes, shining in the Florida sun. He files a homestead claim in 1880. By 1881, he reports his tuberculosis is gone. He credits the springs on the property, which he claims have healing properties. Whether you attribute that to mineral water, the Florida climate, or Native American spirit guidance depends entirely on what you had for breakfast this morning and your general disposition toward the universe. What is not in dispute is this: George Colby stayed. He deeded his land to the community. And on December 18th, 1894, the Southern Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp Meeting Association was officially chartered. The name, by the way, comes from a Seneca Nation word meaning rocks beneath the water. The founder named his town after his ghost. That's either poetic or entirely too on the nose, or possibly both. Now, here's what most people get wrong about Cassadaga. They assume it's a gimmick, a collection of people who've found a niche market in human longing and set up shop. And here's the thing: there's a version of that concern that is fair. Just outside the official camp boundaries, you'll find businesses offering tarot readings, palm readings, crystal sales, and services that have about as much to do with traditional spiritualism as a gift shop has to do with a museum. The camp itself makes this distinction pointedly. They will tell you certified camp mediums don't use tarot cards. They don't do crystal readings. Their practice is mental mediumship, sitting across from you, opening a channel, and relaying what comes through. Whether that's real is a question this podcast will not answer for you, because frankly, that's not our lane. What we can tell you is that these people take it seriously in a way that deserves the same respect you'd give any other religious community. And that's the key thing. Spiritualism is a religion. It's also, according to practitioners, a science and a philosophy. It believes that individual personalities survive death, that communication with those personalities is possible, and that such communication should bring comfort and moral clarity to the living. The camp believes in God and in the teachings of Jesus. It just doesn't embrace the concept of original sin or the idea that anyone is eternally damned, which, honestly, is a theological position that probably sounds appealing to a very large number of people. Local preachers in nearby communities told their congregations to stay away, that the power at work in Cassadaga came from darkness, not from what spiritualists call infinite intelligence. There are accounts of people growing up nearby who were told their cars would die if they drove into camp, that no birds flew over Cassadaga. The camp is still here. The birds fly over just fine. The 1920s were the golden age of Cassadaga. The country was in a mood: jazz, excess, and a peculiar American tendency to become fascinated with death. Séances were fashionable. The community was booming. In 1922, they built the Cassadaga Hotel to handle visitors. Then, on Christmas Eve in 1926, the original wooden hotel burned down. They rebuilt. They always rebuilt. The current hotel had been standing since 1927 and is, depending on your threshold for this sort of thing, either charmingly atmospheric or actively terrifying. The hotel openly advertises its ghosts, not obliquely, not a wink, right there on the homepage. We have ghosts. Here's where they hang out. Please enjoy your stay. The most storied of these is a guest from the 1930s named Arthur, described, and I love this detail, by his smell, specifically alcohol, cigars, and what one account charitably calls a bit of body odor that was difficult to avoid in Florida before air conditioning. Arthur apparently checked in and never fully checked out. He flickers lights. He passes through guests with a cold chill. He occasionally appears as a shadow at the foot of the bed. If you're looking for a hotel that has genuinely leaned into its brand identity, Cassadaga Hotel is doing the work. Now, we have to talk about the chair. Just outside the official camp boundaries, in the Lake Helen Cassadaga Cemetery, there sits a red brick bench. Stone benches in cemeteries were not uncommon in the early 20th century. Wealthier families had them placed at grave sites, places to sit while you mourned. This particular bench was built in the 1920s for a man who had just lost his wife. He had arthritis. He needed a place to rest when he came to visit her grave. That is the whole story of the bench. What happened next is entirely a product of the human imagination, which, when pointed at a cemetery and given nothing to do at midnight, is capable of generating considerable content. Over time, the bench acquired a legend, and then more legend, and then a name, the Devil's Chair. Because apparently grief isn't a dark enough backstory. The folklore says, sit in it at midnight and the devil will speak to you. Leave an unopened beer on the seat and by morning it will be empty, but still sealed. The camp itself addresses this directly, noting that the Devil's Chair is an urban legend with no connection to spiritualism, that the spiritualist camp does not believe in the devil, and that the story defies logic, which is the most polite possible way a community of mediums can tell you, stop sneaking into the cemetery at midnight. The cemetery has had to employ security. Some of the camp's mediums have reportedly discouraged the trespassing by mentioning, calmly, pleasantly, their connections to the other side and their general familiarity with what happens when people disrespect the dead. Whether that's a warning or a threat depends on your interpretation of the afterlife. Here's what Cassadaga is really about underneath all of it. Spiritualism as a movement was born in the United States in 1848 in upstate New York, when two sisters claimed to be communicating with a spirit through knocking sounds in their home. This was not a fringe event. It spread across the country like a grass fire. And the reason it spreads is not complicated. It was the Civil War. More than 500,000 Americans died between 1861 and 1865. More than 500,000 families had an empty chair at the table, a coat that still smelled like someone, a silence where a voice used to be. If anyone, told you there was a way to hear that voice again, you would go to them. You would go from New York to Florida in a mule-drawn wagon if that's what it took. Cassadaga was built on grief, not on gimmicks or spectacle or tourism. On the oldest, most universally human ache there is, belief that the people we love do not simply cease, that whatever they were continues, and that the walls between us are thinner than we think. This isn't about spookiness. It's about working to prove that there is life after death. That is not the quote of someone who is running a haunted hayride. That's the quote of someone who has given their life to a belief, the way other people give their lives to medicine or music or teaching. If you go, and you should, here's what you will actually encounter. You will walk in past two white pillars at the top of Stevens Street. The streets are quiet, lined with oak trees. The homes are Victorian, modest, well kept. Some have small signs on the front, hours of availability, names of the resident medium or healer. It looks like an extremely genteel neighborhood where everyone happens to have a very specific side hustle. You can either register for a reading at the Welcome Center, you can take a walking tour, you can attend a Sunday service at the Colby Memorial Temple, which has been holding services since 1923. The Camp Bookstore carries the largest selection of spiritualist literature in the region. There's a labyrinth for walking meditation. There is Seneca Park along the shores of Lake Colby, named in two different directions for a ghost and for the man the ghost led here. Deer come through in the mornings. And at the Cassadaga Hotel bar, on any given evening, you'll find a mixture of people that is unlike any other bar in the world. Skeptics nursing a whiskey. True believers who drove here from 3 states away. Working mediums who just finished a session and are decompressing like anyone else who had a demanding job that involves absorbing other people's emotional weight all day. The conversations are extraordinary. And one last thing you must do. Sit for a reading. I don't care where you land on the question of whether any of it's real. That question, honestly, is the least interesting part of the experience. What is interesting is sitting across from another human being who has devoted decades of their life to the practice of listening, to the living, to whatever the living carry with them, to what we cannot see but cannot stop reaching for. Something will happen in that room. It may be remarkable. It may be ordinary. It may change something in you. It may not. But you will leave knowing more about yourself than you did going in, which is the actual return on investment of almost every meaningful experience. Then, if you're made of the right stuff, take the walk out to the cemetery. Dusk is better than midnight for this. More honest, the light is low, and gold in the oaks make long shadows, and the Spanish moss moves in a way that has no good explanation. Find the bench. Sit in it. Sit in the chair that a grieving man had built so he could rest near his wife. Bring nothing. Take nothing. Just sit there for a minute. The devil will not speak to you, but something will. George Colby followed a ghost across a continent, healed his lungs in a Florida spring, built a town, gave it away, and eventually wandered back at the end of his life to die on the land the ghost had shown him. He's buried there in the cemetery, not far from the bench. His spirit guide was named Seneca, a word meaning rocks beneath the water. And the town he built is still there, above the rocks, still receiving visitors, still in the business of helping people hear what the silence is saying. You can believe in none of it and still feel something standing on those streets under those oaks. Or you can believe in all of it. Either way, the moss doesn't care. The trees don't care. The bench doesn't care. And somewhere in that gap between what we know and what we need, that's where Cassadaga lives. Go. You'll find your own way home. You always do. This has been Drive Thru Towns. I'm your host, Andrew Wilcox. A special thanks to Chloe Jones for providing our music. If you enjoyed this journey, please follow the podcast to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. To keep the conversation going, you can connect with me on Instagram at 50 State Family. Find me on LinkedIn under Wilcox Legal, or reach out directly via email at wilcoxlegal@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next road.
'Cause I was wandering free on an American dream with a million things to see and do. but it's all good, I'm fine. Had the time of my life, 'cause I did it all